Okay, so we had the gold up here, and Miss Pegleg went up, dropped the gold, came down. Uh, we have some stuff here, and Pegleg took his gold. Put it over here for now. We'll just say he's got the gold and put it down here. Took his gold. He checked on the pirate who was in the hole. Went off to his ship. So he's in the distance now down that path. And he saw the tiger swimming in, and he got on his ship and sailed away, and made it back to pay tuition in time. And then years later, Pegleg had just completed surgery on a broken leg, which is kind of ironic. And from his office door comes an old man wearing black clothing, and he says, "Years ago you saved my life." I guess he stood on the desk. "And I owe you everything." And Pegleg said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm happy now. Let's be friends." And they were best friends from then on. The end. Alright, so now that we have this story, it's, it's not unmanageable. It's still short. Actually quite short. And let's talk about how this happened, right? Our exposition was, make this a bit smaller. Our exposition told us who, what, and where, and our initial incident got our story going. And we had Pegleg was the pirate, was sick of being a pirate. So we know it's Pegleg, we have a who, we have a where, we found that it's in the forest of Noremthal, that's our where. And what is he going for? He's going to see a great pile of gold and get it. Okay. And then the forest was calm and sunny, and he saw the gold. He was happy, so he went for it. But then we had a problem. The Bengal tiger came. And this began what's called our rising action. All of the different challenges that Pegleg had to face to get his gold were all a part of the rising action. And we're going to look at a different diagram in a minute, but this is the traditional plot diagram. So we had a few elements of our rising action. It wasn't just one thing. We had a couple things. We had the tiger with the rope, and we had the ninja, and the reflexology incident, and then we had the riddle with Mr. Fowles. All of that is part of the rising action. So the rising action is most of the story. Not until we conquered all of that did we get to this paragraph, which is the climax. That's where Pegleg finally gets his gold, and he's finally happy. Yeah, he accomplished his purpose. The thing of his initial incident was he wanted to go to college, but he needed the money, so he finally got the money here at the climax. All of that stuff in the middle is part of what's called the rising action. It's when the stress builds, and he's getting ever closer, but oh, there's always something in the way. And then we have this paragraph, which kind of just takes us out of the story a little bit. It's when he got to his ship, he checked on the ninja, and he saw the tiger, but, they're all coming back. No big deal. He goes to his ship, and he sails back home. And then these last two paragraphs are part of the resolution, or denouement. That's the French word for resolution. And that's important because it ties up some loose ends of the story. What happened to the ninja? We never did find out what happened to the tiger, but that's okay. And it's just the end of the story. And it comes out peacefully. We can't just say that the pirate got the gold, dropped it, and went home. We find out here that he did become a doctor, and he became a surgeon, and a successful one at that. And then we even have a nice happy ending with him and the ninja becoming best friends, which shows us that this is fictional because pirates and ninjas are mortal enemies. So that becomes our story. And the next part is just going to talk a little bit about how this diagram, how this rising action actually is composed of a few more elements than is shown on this diagram. But we'll call this the end of the plot video because we have all of our basic components. I just want, and I'll make a separate video that talks about what's going on here. Alright, Hi. This is just a quick follow-up to the plot video, and we're going to talk about conflict. I mentioned in the last video about the plot mountain, and it shows the progress of stress in a story. There's an exposition, there's an initial incident that starts the story rolling, because otherwise you just have characters sitting somewhere in a setting. You need to have something that starts the rising action, something that makes the story move, and then there's a climax at the end, at the top there, and then there's some more that is extremely important in the following action. And for an explanation of all that, you can check out the plot video. I'll put a link into the comments. But in reality, the story is a little bit more like this. You have an exposition, and I guess I need to put the initial incident in there. I've forgotten to put that. And instead of a smooth line going upward, notice that it's very craggy and rocky on the way upward. And this is the true representation of a rising action. And that's because more than one thing happens. In my story, for example, there was a tiger, a ninja, and then Mr. Fowls. 3 things. This is more than 3 crags, of course. But all of these things represent individual conflicts. Let me get rid of this one. Individual conflicts. Conflict, it's something, 2 things that disagree with each other. 2 things that aren't great. 2 things that don't work well. And there are 4 types of literary conflicts. Man versus man versus environment or nature, man versus self, and man versus society. And the whole diagram has one conflict, of which the climax is the resolution of the conflict. But each of these little peaks is also a conflict. So if we talk about, in the context of our story, we've got Pegleg, who's sick of being a pirate. That is the whole conflict of the story. That's what starts it. He wants to get gold to pay for college tuition, though he needed a large infusion of gold and quickly. And this is what kind of starts the story. So we could say that that's kind of a man versus society conflict. There's no inner turmoil, but he needs to pay for this tuition. Or you might even consider it man versus environment. It's not, I guess now thinking about it, it's more like man versus environment. So this conflict is man versus environment. And because the environment is the college and the man is Pegleg. So he goes to the forest and he sees that the gold is up in a tree. And that's kind of man versus environment as well, because he's got to climb up the tree, he's got a peg leg. These things can be very difficult for pirates. And then the first thing that happens is there's a tiger. That's the Bengal tiger. And that we can even call that man versus man, even though the tiger's not a person, but he functions like it in the story. But I think the textbooks would say it's man versus environment. Though it's embodied in one creature, but it's not a big deal. And he goes up, he fights the tiger, he defeats the tiger. Then there's a ninja, which is clearly man versus man. Goes up, fights the ninja, gets to the ninja, and goes down again. Then he runs into Mr. Fowls, who gives him a riddle. Goes up, and comes back down again. So all these are man versus man conflicts. And I could have written some more into the story to make it come all the way up to the climax when Pegleg finally climbs the tree and gets his gold. So all of these, it's important to know these different conflicts. You need to know what they are and how to recognize them. So man versus man is, 2 people fighting it out, clearly melodramatic. Man versus environment is when something in the world is difficult and somebody's got to fix it. Man versus self is when a person has to struggle with their own nature. For example, perhaps Pegleg got to the gold and he had to decide if he wanted to sacrifice his other leg for the gold. And that would be man versus self, because he would be arguing with himself in a way. Then man versus society, when there's a generalized enemy perhaps, and he's conflicting with many people that represent one group, or in the example of like the Scarlet Letter, for example, Hester was in conflict with the society she found herself in, even though she thrived within that society. Um, but I just wanted to show how the rising action is not a smooth line always, and has several sub-conflicts within it that trace the ascent up Plot Mountain. And then you still have your standard falling action and resolution, but it's the rising action has got to be craggy like this and rocky. Otherwise, it's kind of boring. And that's it for conflict. Thank you.